Professor Roth joined CMC in 1966. He retired almost 40 years later, exactly retired in beginning of 2007. Many of you remember his courses on the American Dream, on the Holocaust, of course, founding the PPE program and teaching the philosophy section of PPE until his retirement. Professor Roth, it is such a pleasure to have you here. You founded one of our CMC institutes, now known as the McGrublian Center for Human Rights, an inspiration to many. We are so excited to have you here today. Thank you and welcome. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Evan. And I'm so deeply honored and grateful to have this opportunity. As we sit at November 12th, 2020, I hope all of you and your families are well and are getting along all right in our troubled time. This is a little different kind of a CMC class than we all are normally thinking about, but I'm going to try to guide our thinking today in a way that I would have done if we were together on campus and in a classroom. And what that means is that I'll talk for a while and then I'll stop talking and ask you to talk and to think about a variety of questions and dilemmas and hopes and dreams that we probably share and that CMC is intertwined with in one way or another. So as Evan mentioned, one of the courses that I taught for many years at CMC was called Perspectives on the American Dream. And I want to start our session in that course this afternoon by recalling some words from our country's history that can inform and contextualize our perspectives this afternoon as we think about the American dream and what I'm calling November dreams in particular. So now a series of ideas, quotes, things that will be completely familiar to you. But as you hear these, think about them as perhaps ingredients or elements in what we call the American dream. In 1630, John Winthrop drew on scripture to advise his Puritan followers that the community they would establish in New England could be a praiseworthy, exemplary city up on a hill. But Winthrop added, only if the community followed the biblical counsel of the prophet Micah to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. In 1776, our Declaration of Independence said, we hold these truths. In 1787, we, the people of the United States, ordained and established the Constitution. Its dream of a more perfect union emphasized, among other things, establishment of justice and promotion of the general welfare. Probably written in 1862, one of Emily Dickinson's poems says, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose. In 1893, Frederick Jackson Turner's essay on the significance of the frontier in American history asserted that America has been another name for opportunity. 10 years later, in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois' crucial study called The Souls of Black Folk corrected Turner in a sentence as understated as it remains telling. America, said Du Bois, is not another word for opportunity to all her sons and daughters. Du Bois' experience with racism led him to have what he called hope, not hopeless, but unhopeful about the United States. On April 29th, 1931, the journalist, novelist, and social activist Mary Heaton Vorse published a report in the New Republic tallying the devastation of the Great Depression. She described what she called a census of misery, the count of despair. The misery, doubt, and defeat pile up, she wrote, an incalculable mountain. In 1938, the Black poet Langston Hughes echoed W.E.B. Du Bois in a poem that Hughes called "Let America Be America Again." Oh, yes, wrote Hughes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet, he went on, I swear this oath, America will be an ever-living seed. Its dream lies deep in the heart of me. That same year, another American poet, Archibald MacLeish, had perspectives akin to Hughes's. His poetic soundtrack, as he called it, to a series of Depression-era photographs concluded by wondering whether the great American dream is finished. We can't say, wrote MacLeish. We aren't sure. We're asking. Sometime later in 1975, Adrienne Rich raised questions from an old house in America, as she called a poem with these lines. I am an American woman. I turn that over like a leaf pressed in a book I stop and look up from. Before Turner and Du Bois, Hughes, MacLeish, and Rich, Walt Whitman surveyed democratic vistas, as he called his 1871 book. In his lover's quarrel with America, he spared no criticism. The official services of America, he said, national, state, and municipal, except the judiciary, are saturated in corruption, bribery, falsehood, maladministration, and he added the judiciary is tainted. But Whitman remained hopeful. America, he said, counts, as I reckon, for her justification and success, or who's yet dare claim success, almost entirely on the future. America counts for its justification and success, said Whitman, almost entirely on the future. I began teaching about the American dream in the early 1970s. Even before that, I'd had an interest in American philosophy and religion and literature, but when I was in Austria at the University of Innsbruck on a Fulbright fellowship, I was expected to give a year-long series of lectures on American intellectual history. And as I fished around for kind of a unifying theme and concept that I might use in planning that year-long series of lectures, I hit on the idea of the American dream. And eventually, when I returned to CMC, I started teaching a course that I called Perspectives on the American Dream. One result of that course was a book that some of you might remember, maybe some of you even still have it. It was called American Ground. And the subtitle of the book was Vistas, Visions, and Revisions. This was a book that Robert Fossum, a longtime professor of literature at CMC, and I compiled because we kept looking for a good source that would have basic texts that we could use as he and I teamed up eventually to teach Perspectives on the American Dream. So that book was a result. It's still in print, and occasionally people tell me they find it useful. All of the passages that I cited when I began, the ones that range from John Winthrop to Walt Whitman to Emily Dickinson, Adrian Rich, all of those passages come from the reprints of texts that are contained in that volume called American Ground. The course Perspectives on the American Dream usually took place in the first semester. And I always liked it when we reached the month of November, because I think of all the months in the year, November is the best month for thinking about the American dream. And the reason I say that, you can look at the calendar and figure out why. November always contains election day. It's when election day comes. And just yesterday, we observed Veterans Day, which also happens to be the anniversary of a hanging that took place in the United States in 1831. On November 11th, 1831, long before Veterans Day existed, a Black man named Nat Turner was hanged in a place at the time called Jerusalem, Virginia. His corpse was mutilated after the hanging. And his crime was that he had led an armed rebellion of Black slaves against their owners. It was the largest insurrection of that kind in the pre-Civil War South. So that's something worth thinking about in November when we think about American dreams. And then, of course, there's Thanksgiving, which this year will be special because it will be a COVID-19 Thanksgiving. And every time I turn on the news lately, Americans are being warned by their scientists and doctors not to have a traditional Thanksgiving this year. So that's worth thinking about as we contemplate the American dream in November. The American dream has been a recurring theme in President Trump's rhetoric. He invoked it in announcing his bid for the presidency, saying, "The American dream is dead." But, he added, "if I get elected president, I will bring it back bigger and better and stronger than ever before, and we will make America great again." Subsequently, at a town hall discussion early this October, a student asked Joe Biden, "Can you guarantee me the American dream still exists?" The now president-elect answered, "I guarantee it." The concept of the American dream is bandied about in many ways. I did a Google search on the concept a couple of days ago and turned up 1.7 billion hits for the concept. 1.7 billion. It frequently appears in political discourse, advertising, and in literature. I used to keep a collection of newspaper and magazine references to the American dream. That was before the internet existed, and now, lo and behold, you can get 1.7 billion hits on the concept. Amazing. Different moods are infused or linked with this idea. Irony and mockery, for example, are there. For some, the American dream is laughable, full of irony. And for others, it stands as an idea that is, in good and right ways, full of aspiration and hope. It's part of American exceptionalism. The literary critic Lionel Trilling in 1950 remarked, "The United States of America is the only nation that prides itself upon a dream and gives its name to one." Questions swirl around and through the American dream. One of them is, what are the concept's origins? How did it start? Where did it come from? Key elements, as my list of ideas and statements from our past suggest that elements of the American dream go far back in our history. But the term itself, the literal term, at least in its popularized form, is not that old. For example, in 1931, a popular historian named James Truslow Adams published a widely read book that he called The Epic of America. It went through many republications and was pretty much a bestseller in its day in the middle of the Depression. James Truslow Adams was one of the first to popularize the concept of the American dream. And he contended, as he wrote about it, that apart from the dream, he said, the glory of America's epic would be lost. Indeed, he believed that the dream was the greatest contribution the United States had as yet made to the thought and welfare of the world. He summed up his vision of what the American dream was about by referring to that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for every person, with opportunity for each according to his or her ability or achievement. In his kind of antiquated way, as we read it today, he said, the dream is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. Now, Adams's summation notwithstanding, the contents of the American dream are not simply identified, let alone easily reconciled or smoothly put into practice. Arguably, the American dream is not one dream, but many. Its meanings are not only shared, tested, and clashing no less than they are constructed. As I've thought about this concept and its ambiguity and vagueness and the multiplicity of meanings that it can carry, I found over the years that it seemed to me there were two main strands that had to be singled out and identified. One strand in the American dream, I would say, is economic, materialistic, and individualistic. It's the idea that the American dream is about achieving wealth and success and accomplishment as an individual. And then there's a strand in the dream, and when you tease this out, you can see why these two might collide and clash with each other sometimes. I would call the second major strand social, idealistic, and communal. It focuses on social justice, on equality, on overcoming discrimination and prejudice and inequality. Its classic text would be Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. So these two ideas, a kind of individualistic, success and wealth-oriented strand, and a more idealistic, socially oriented, communally oriented aspiration are both in the dream. They're both key parts of it, but they don't always fit together very well, and they often clash and collide with one. Coming at this in just a slightly different way, among the widely shared meanings embedded in the American dream might be the following. Here are three that are also pretty fundamental, I think, in the American dream concept. But again, they may, collide and clash as much as they fit together well and neatly. One, going back to John Winthrop's image of the city on the hill, is that the United States is the greatest country in the history of the world. A second theme is that meritocracy is a hallmark of American life. Hard work and talent justifiably take you to the top. CMC buys into that part of the dream, I think. And then another one would be whatever shortcomings or flaws we may have, new beginnings are possible. And as Joe Biden likes to say, I'm going to hear this again and again, we've already have, we are the United States of America, and there's nothing we can't do if we do it together. That's a real American dream, isn't it? Nothing we can't do if we do it together. Now, how do such outlooks, how does the American dream seem to us as we move in November 2020 from a deeply divided election day, pondering with my insistence the legacy of Nat Turner's rebellion and his hanging on a pre-Veterans Day, November 11th, as we think about Veterans Day in November 2020, and as we anticipate a COVID Thanksgiving with more than 240,000 dead and the count spiking. How does the American dream seem to us? on November 12th, 2020? That's my question, but I want to complicate it just a little more before I help me understand where you are on a question like that, and maybe help me to understand where I should be as well. If Whitman remains correct in thinking that the justification and success of the American dream depends hugely on the future, on what we decide to do individually and collectively, then here are some of the key November questions and challenges, at least to my mind, that test the American dream's credibility and value. I'm 80 years old, so I'm too old to mince words. And this I'm going to line out for you here is, I hope, going to be a little bit hard hitting, but I'll invite you to respond in whatever way you wish, and together we'll think about this for a little while. Should American exceptionalism be pronounced dead? Have we reached a point in history where all that we know about ourselves should lead us to lay aside the notion that we are exceptional? Another question: how should we deal with the diagnosis that American life is plagued by endemic caste-based racism? I expect I'm not alone in our group here in having recently read Isabel Wilkerson's best-selling book called Caste, which is a deep indictment of American life as endemically racist. Is the American dream a help or a hindrance as we face the existential threat of climate change? Should we believe that there is the right side of history and that our country is on it? Are our institutions sufficient to sustain democracy? What if they, including even the rule of law, are subverted to threaten democracy? How does the American dream fit with the fact that by 2050, the United States will be a majority-minority country with white non-Hispanics making up less than half of the total population? Is white grievance justifiably part of the American dream? How do issues about gender and sexual identity affect the American dream? How should they? Think about Rich's poem, "I'm an American woman." How does that fit with the American dream? Earlier this week, the columnist Thomas Friedman wrote about what he called the freedom battle of our generation, which he said is about the need to restore the stigma to lying and liars before it is too late. We need, he said, to hunt for truth, fight for truth, mercilessly discredit the forces of disinformation. Where is the American dream in that struggle? How should the American dream be understood in relation to the October 2020 Forbes magazine report that according to the latest Fed data, the top 1% of Americans have a combined net worth of $34.2 trillion, or 30.4% of all household wealth in the United States, while the bottom 50% of the population holds just 2.1 trillion combined, or 1.9% of all wealth. Does or should the American dream awaken what the civil rights leader John Lewis called good trouble, necessary trouble? Or does the dream keep us slumbering too comfortably? Is the American dream so problematic, especially its autocratic notion that hard work and equality mean that everyone has a shot at earning a piece of American pie? Is the American dream so problematic that we Americans would be more honest if we consigned it to the dustbin of history? So that's what I would have to say in perspectives on the American dream if I were in a CMC classroom on campus on November 12th, 2020. And as is usual in the CMC classroom, the best part of the class is the discussion that follows after the professor has said so. So that's what I would like to invite. What do you think? How do you, as you think about this elusive, ambiguous, but unrelenting concept of the American dream, where you can get 1.7 billion hits on your Google search engine, you know, what should we do with this idea?
Thanks, John. If anyone would like to speak, I know, Carl, you've unmuted yourself, so you might have a comment or a question here, but feel free to raise your hand in the participant section or put something in the chat. Or I think we can even, with 114 of us, I think we can even just unmute and see how it goes. So
yeah, I was just going to say to Dr. Roth that you just posed more questions than the books behind you about what the American dream is. And the only thing I would say about the American dream is I think it's changed since I was a kid, which was quite a long time ago, because I'm older than most of the people on this call, I would imagine. And I don't think it's changed for the better.
Carl, follow up a little bit. What has been the downside of the change, do you think?
Well, I think that the downside has been we had racism when I was a kid, and we had some of these other negative things, but I think over time, it's actually become worse. It's almost been, you try to subterfuge it, but it's always an underlying problem. Have you read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, by any chance?
No, I don't know that text.
Okay, it's about this lady. Well, yeah, it's this black lady who's, you know, a very poor black lady, and she develops ovarian cancer, I think it was, that she had cancer.
Okay, yeah, I'm registering on it now.
Yeah, and then they took her cells, and her cells became these cures for all sorts of things. And her family she never benefited from it. But I guess now some of her grandkids are. The lady who wrote the book, it took her 10 years to write the book, started a foundation, and now she's giving some money back to her those Henrietta Lacks's grandchildren and so on. But to me, that was a very moving book. It was like, here's a lady who was too poor to understand what was being done to her. And she was exploited, I think, by the medical profession and everything else. But her genes are providing cures for all these diseases we're faced with. So anyways, it's a very good book, I think.
We had, Carl, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat so people could see
Okay.
the book title. A few people, John, asking about social media and concern that social media is eroding the American dream, the visions of a perfect life going out to hundreds, if not thousands of people. Can the American dream survive the positive and negative effects of social media? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Maybe so, Evan, maybe somebody in the group would like to take on that question.
Galen Drace.
I think it ties into what Carl was saying when I don't think racism has gotten worse, but certain aspects of our society, whether it's social media or how we gain information these days, has removed the facade that a lot of us in privilege have been able to live behind and look at the American dream as the white family from the 50s in the white picket fence in the suburb, and realize, one, that is not attainable to the majority of our population, even many white people, but that people of color have been suffering untold horrors for the existence of our entire country. And that is becoming more and more, I don't want to say accessible, that's such a trite word for it, but we have to come to terms with it. And it leads to, I'm forgetting who made the comment, but about two different aspects of reality. Somebody in the chat said that. And I think that has been part of the downfall of social media, is that we have two different versions of reality that many people in our country, either in one or the other, at the same time has shown a light onto some of the negatives in our country, and hopefully sunlight becomes that disinfectant.
You'd mentioned,
As I often used to say in discussion, what do some of the rest of you think?
I would build on
Elizabeth,
what,
there you are.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Do you want to go ahead? I know someone had just started talking. I'll go after you. That's fine.
go ahead, Liz, and then we'll go to Rick.
Sure. I think something that I think, why the American dream has to grow and change and evolve and morph into, I don't know, a better caterpillar. Maybe it's not a butterfly, not really sure. It's just like the meritocracy that's at the heart of it, right? Is that, it's just like there's so many other factors besides hard work and talent that really go into success. And I feel like sometimes the American dream, it doesn't always account for that or isn't as much aware of it or promote it. And so it's something that I'm thinking of a lot, is that, if the American dream continues to be central, it's like we have to consider the role of the meritocracy within that.
Rick.
yeah, no, I certainly agree with that. I was going to respond to Galen, but I can try to build on that as well. But I do think that, as Galen was pointing out, dating back to the beginnings of the country, even, John Winthrop, the evaluation of this being the greatest country on earth, has to ignore some hard truths by today's standards, including slavery and how we treated indigenous peoples. And I think some part of the American dream involves a version of acquisitiveness, of taking, a homestead from a continent that was occupied, even though the people who settled it believed it was empty, or at least characterized it that way. And in some ways, I think it's not an unfair characterization of the American dream to say that part of the core of it is to have blinders to some of those hard realities and plow forward undeterred. And in some ways, that is maybe a good thing for entrepreneurship, for creating incentives, for not disincentivizing too much. But at the same time, now that we have things like social media and rapid information profusion, undeterred by gatekeepers, for example, including through social media, I think we are confronted with those hard realities a little bit more aggressively. One other point I wanted to just raise, and this is about whether or not our institutions are up to the task of working on behalf of the American dream, is I think a development in the 20th and 21st century is that some of our institutions have outgrown human proportions. And in particular, I think a lot of people might think that about the way corporations are governed or big economic interests act. It's rarely the case now that any one person or even small group of people can exercise influence over those significant powers. And I think that's a new thing, and that has big implications on the American dream.
Barbara, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Roth. It's Barbara Ray. I was class 95 PPE, took your perspectives on the American dream and Holocaust class. So it's so great to be a part of this today. It's great to see you. And one of the things, I have two daughters now, one who is actually applying to college and CMC's on her list, wants to study history. We talk about history in our household a lot. And what I worry about is her generation and my younger daughter, who is 14 going on 15. They are very soured on the ability to even talk to the other side. We're a Democratic family. They're far more liberal than I am because they're younger, of course. But my father, for example, another CMC alum, is far on the right. And we don't even feel like we can talk about anything political or even historical because of that schism. And I would love to hear any thoughts you might have about that divide that is so, seems to be such a big problem in this country. We can't even talk to each other anymore. And how we can even have an American dream if we can't even talk to each other.
You know, what I'm thinking, Barbara, is that having maybe a way to have a conversation is to bring out this idea of the American dream and kind of find out what people think about it. You know, I've been in my comments today kind of in the camp of Walt Whitman. That is, you know, not sparing any criticism and not mincing words. But I want to hasten to add that I do not want the American dream to be consigned to the dustbin of history. I love this concept in some way, which was why I kept teaching about it for all its flaws and vagueness and ambiguities, because I know, and I think this is true of probably many of us who are here together in cyberspace right now, we've lived versions of the American dream. And we know that the best parts of it are, as Whitman maybe reminds us, they're aspirational. They're yet to be. It depends on the future, on what we do, on how we act, what responsibilities we take. And so I think that one of the ways that you save something is by being utterly honest and truthful about it. And yes, the American dream is a fraught idea. It can, the people who have made fun of it, mocked it, seen the ironies in it, have their perspective that is not to be dismissed. But there's something worth affirming about this idea. And if I were going to identify what I take to be the two classic texts for the American dream, I mentioned Martin Luther King's American Dream speech, but the other piece of writing that I think is among the most important and the most eloquent and the most hopeful is the preamble to the United States Constitution. I think, you know, if we can have a conversation about that with people who may even, you know, disagree very strongly with us, without being constitutional lawyers, but just to read the prose that's there. It's kind of like Emily Dickinson, I dwell in possibility of fairer house than prose. There's something about the preamble to the Constitution that fits what Dickinson had in mind when she thought about poetry. I don't think you could easily turn the preamble of the Constitution into a poem, but there are poetic elements in it. And so that's the reason I kept teaching about the American dream, was because I felt that America had fallen far short of what the dream at its best stood for, but that was the reason to keep striving and keep reviving and keep this idea alive and as well as we could make it. So that's how I try to start to respond to your good comment.
We're going to go to Susie Kim next. Susie, if you want to unmute yourself there. A previous comment, John, also questioned whether the American dream was alive, because it seems there are two different realities of what the American dream could or should be. And I think a little bit of what Barbara had mentioned, that inability to reconcile the two or to find that common ground in conversation could be difficult. Susie.
Yeah, hi, Professor Roth.
Hi, Susie.
So I think for me, I'm just not sure that the American dream really applies anymore, because, if we want to think about American dream, or if we want to measure the American dream as the possibility of upward mobility, I don't think there's anything inherently American about it anymore. And other countries have done a much better job of bringing more of their people out of poverty and into the middle class, and giving more of that, like beautiful romantic concept of possibility, opportunity, etc. And that's evidence with access to education as well as healthcare, and like the ability to live a life that's not like doomed in poverty, or like not having access to, really access to healthcare, I think, is a huge part of like being able to live a decent life. And with that, I just wonder if this concept is even like relevant and applicable today. And how we would measure this concept in today's society.
Okay, good.
Gordon Bjork, if you want to unmute yourself, it's good to have you. We have all the PPE founders here.
What a nice. There's Gordon.
Go ahead, you're unmuted. Uh-oh. I think you're unmuted, Gordon, but I don't think your microphone is on.
Here we have to unmute Gordon.
I don't think the microphone's working. Gordon, work on your technical side. I'm sorry, but I think your microphone is off. And we're going to go to let's go to Elizabeth WYDRA. If you're here, Elizabeth.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
There you are.
So I just want to say how fantastic it is to have this opportunity to be kind of transported back into the wonderful classrooms in Claremont with the exceptionally wonderful John Roth. And it just does my heart so good to see Gordon Bjork. And I was a PPE major, graduated in 1998, and I still very much have and refer to Professor Roth's American Dreams book. And so I'm a constitutional lawyer. I run a public interest law firm, the Constitutional Accountability Center, that is dedicated to the progressive promise of the Constitution. And so, I think about these things all the time, but John, you really made me think a lot tonight about two aspects of the American dream that I think are really telling. And like you, I remain optimistic even while being realistic about this, because I think, one thing about a dream that, some folks have talked about in the comments as well, is that it's aspirational. And I think that means we can recognize that it isn't a reality, that there's a major gap between promises and reality. And there's a major gap between the dream and the lived reality for many, many Americans. But that doesn't mean we necessarily give up on it. And I think, we look to that, I look to that, like one of the most influential constitutional thinkers for me is Frederick Douglass. And I think that,
yes,
perhaps there's no better authority on the aspirational quality and the bleak reality of the American dream than Black Americans throughout history, who have very clearly recognized, like Frederick Douglass, that there are these great American ideals that can be our North Star, while also recognizing that we fall short all the time. And I guess that brings me to the second thing that, John, you made me think about tonight, about the quality of dreaming with respect to the American dream. And that's that dreams often happen while you're asleep, those that aren't sort of visions and goals. And a lot of us, and I think, I apologize for making assumptions about a lot of us on this call just by looking at us. A lot of us, I think, have needed to wake up, have needed to wake up from this American dream that we're having, to recognize reality. And I think that's a good thing, because it makes it far more likely that we and our brothers and sisters and other members of this American family will be able to achieve that dream if we can see that it isn't a reality. I think that that's really important, and it can have this, I think your questions, Professor Roth, that you laid out, are hard for us, people who care about this country, and a lot of the conversations about American exceptionalism are hard for us to accept. But if we don't accept them and face them, then the American dream really will be dead. And I don't want to see that happen. And I think conversations like this, where we can take a hard look and also listen to each other, is incredibly important. So I just want to thank you for having this conversation, and thank everyone here for, in good faith, kind of coming together and talking about these things. Because I think this election, really brought forth a lot of divisions about what we see as reality, and how we care for and care about our neighbors and our members of this community. So thank you.
John McDowell, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks. Hello, Professor Roth.
Hi, John.
Yeah, class of 79. A lot of the comments have had a strong negative, not even undertone, but just strong negativity has flown through them about the American dream. Yet I think about the literally tens of thousands of people from around the world who immigrate here every year because of their belief in the American dream, and particularly those who come here illegally, crossing the border under very hard circumstances because of their belief in the American dream. So I think that maybe those of us who are sort of in the middle, or those of us who are doing very well, we have the ability to see the negative parts and comment on that, and maybe some of the blinders we have, that we don't see the positive parts, and the parts that are still working very well for lots of people, and are the light, really the light of the world, where people still come to us. And just on an individual note, I think of a nephew of mine who grew up in a single family, poor minority household. His father was in prison for murder before he was born. Grew up in the housing project, yet now he has a master's degree, lives in a house much bigger than mine. He's 30 years old and he's doing much better than I ever did. And he himself is an example of the workings of the American dream right now in a positive way. So my suggestion just to everyone is to think more broadly about what the American dream, if the American dream is working and how it's working. And I think that many, many people from around the world see it working, and it's still working for many people here in the United States.
John, I wanna interject here. I don't disagree with you at all, but as an immigrant, I will tell you that this country has been, especially under the Trump administration, has been increasingly hostile to immigrants and the contribution of immigrants. And as an immigrant, I also believe that I have, in more objective parts, achieved the American dream. But does America take credit for my contribution, or am I also allowed to take credit for my contribution and celebrate that and be treated as a welcome contributor to this American society? And I think that's the part that's being diminished, which is where we no longer welcome and celebrate immigrants. We shun them as other and dehumanize them and stereotype them as illegal, as criminals or unwelcome.
Thanks, Susie, and thanks, John.
I mean, I'll just
Go ahead.
There's a large, you're absolutely correct. There's a large group of Americans who think that way. Literally yesterday, I was in a meeting with a group of folks from France, folks from Switzerland, folks from India, folks from China. And we actually had this sort of same discussion, not quite in depth, but a similar discussion about this. And those folks all were very, very positive about coming here to America and their reasons for coming. But yes, absolutely, Susie. There is a large group of Americans who I'll take the view that you espouse, but I just think that again, there's a lot of people from around the world who still want to come here, so they still see positive aspects.
Thanks,
Can I
John, and
interject
thanks,
as well?
Susie. Hi, Irina, go ahead.
Hi. Hey, Professor
Irina.
Roth, so great to
Hi.
see you. So I would say as an immigrant myself, I would disagree with Susie's perspective and agree with John's point on, opportunity and seeing the immigrant experience is very positive. I was able to achieve, and my family was able to achieve things in this country that they never would have been able to from my, birth country, which was Moldova. And so while I can appreciate that there are challenges, and some of those challenges may be more significant than they were at the time that my family came here, I still see the level of opportunity that this country presents far exceeding any place else that I'm aware of in the world.
Hi, Professor Roth. This is Lena. Good to see you. I would say, being an immigrant myself, I would echo what Irina was saying, because I think that there are so many opportunities. Like anything else, when you come to a new country, there are, especially for a country this size, there will be people who will welcome you, and there are people who are racist or don't welcome newcomers. I think it happens to the Italians, the Irish, the Germans back in the old days, and it will continue to happen moving forward. But I personally believe that the American dream is alive and well, given to the comment previously about if you ask anybody around the world, if they would drop and would do anything to come to this country for the opportunity that's available. And I think a lot of time Americans are the hardest on ourselves. And because to your point, you talked about striving and wanting to strive for that ideal. And I can tell you that there's no ideal place in the world. And if I have to pick a place to be at and to fight for and to strive for an ideal, this country would be the country I want to do it for. It's not perfect, but man, it's one of the best one in my opinion. Having traveled the world and being an immigrant myself, my family history came from Vietnam as both people. This country welcomed us with open arms. We struggled. It was not handed to us on a platter. We had to earn everything that we got, but it is the only country, and other Vietnamese that have left and went to other countries, we compare notes at times over the years, and they would come to this country in a heartbeat. So I just wanted to give that perspective that we are, because of our desire to be good. I think sometimes we are so hard on ourselves.
Thanks, Kathleen.
I love the idea of us being the most critical, because I also think we should be the most critical. We're striving for a more perfect union. We are not a perfect union. We are striving towards a more perfect union. And John and Susie, Irina, Catalina, I love and I don't know that they're actually at odds. The reason, my issue with the American dream, when it comes to kind of how I conceptualized it when I was little, was kind of that Norman Rockwell version I commented on earlier. And then learning as I grow up and as facades are brought back, how truly hard it is for people to immigrate here and to work their way up. But like you said, Irina and Kathlina, that striving and working, it can be attained. And it might be much easier here than it is other places. My issue with the American dream is realizing how much harder it is to attain than it had been taught to me. And so that's where I don't disagree with John, Susie. I don't disagree with any of you. To me, it's two sides of it. that when compared to other countries where you could immigrate to and what the dream is for that country, the American dream still is one of the best, if not the one to try to attain. But then having the facade brought back and realize how truly tough and hard and how many of our systems in this country are meant to prevent people from succeeding, that has been disheartening to me.
There's just a couple of minutes left, so we're going to go to Kalpana, who raised your hand. Go ahead and unmute and make your comment.
Hi, Professor Roth. I was class of '94 from Scripps, and
class of 2000.
Hi.
And
good to see you.
My son Ashwin is brand new freshman this year. But so between us, we have 7 kids, and the oldest one's a junior at Pitzer, and then this is the second one. And my dad started a tradition of us sitting down and going through all of the candidates and all of the measures and really discussing it kind of from a Rawlsian perspective. And we did that. We've done that once with the older one and now with 2 of them. And I realized that so many of the ideas that we were active around were being re-adjudicated again on the college campus. And I was reminded of a time when when Ashwin here was very young, and we got to meet Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she allowed him to ask a question, and we were a little nervous, but the question he asked was, what do you think will be the major battles of my generation? And her answer was, they'll be the same battles, you'll be fighting them again. And it all leads me to wonder, what have you seen among your students over your tenure of teaching? What have you seen evolve in an understanding of the American dream and pursuit of the American dream?
Okay, maybe this can, Evan, be a segue to finishing up the hour of class. So let me try. I would say the thing that that I value about teaching about this idea has been replicated in our discussion here. That is, I think thinking about different perspectives on the American dream, if you spend some time with it, if it involves some reading and maybe some writing and things of that kind, it produces reflection that has the qualities that we've just experienced. It's people not necessarily agreeing with each other completely, but thinking together and doing it with depth and respect and in a kind of constructive vein. Because what I've heard in our conversation today is, for the most part, I think we as a group would not want to put the American dream in the dustbin of history. We would like it to be alive and well, but in order for that to happen, we have to keep working. And in a way, as I often like to say in class, one nice thing about the American dream is it's a concept that you can use against itself. It is, if you don't find the current thinking about it, or if you're persuaded that there's something deeply flawed about this so much that you're not sure about it anymore, the very flexibility and idealism that is infused into this notion gives it a kind of power to keep coming back against the versions of it that fall short. So I would even be so bold, I would have to think about this in some depth. But you remember my question about what does the American dream have to say about what I call the existential threat of climate change? Now, I think I could fairly easily, if you gave me the assignment, I could develop a reflection on the American dream that would make that concept an ally against the destruction of our environment and our world through environmental degradation. So I think there's power in this idea that those of us who identify as Americans can seize upon if we're inclined to do that. And for all its flaws and ambiguities and vagueness sometimes, it is a concept that has power because at its best it contains, it's a way of encapsulating our best American hopes and ideals. And then I just have to add that I know the American dream is real in some sense because I have lived it. And the proof of that is that I had the privilege of getting to know all of you and work with you and learn from you and have you in classes where we had conversations like this. And that's something that still gives me hope and encouragement. I mean, I can't tell you how much it means just to see all of you, even though it's, you know, in cyberspace, because each and every one of you who's been on this call, I have distinct memories about you, and these are factors that help me to keep the faith as far as the American dream is concerned. So the last thing I would say is to harken back to a text that sometimes Bob Fossum and I used in the American Dream course that we taught together. There's a play, you will all heard of it if you haven't read it. Most of you have read it, I think. It's the play by Arthur Miller called Death of a Salesman. Remember this, some of you? At the end of the play, Willie Loman, who is the salesman, he's died, and his friend Charlie speaks at Willie Loman's funeral. And Charlie says about his friend Willie, he says, "Salesman has got to dream, boy. It comes with the territory." And I think there's a sense in which those of us who live on American ground, to go back to the title of that anthology that I quoted from earlier, that maybe that's what should be said of us, that being American with the territory of that experience goes the dreaming, the hoping, the aspiring to something that reflects the ideals that we hold when we are at our best. And if the American dream can help us to keep our eye on those targets and help us to move in those directions, then that idea has lasting value.
Thank you,
You
Professor
show
Roth.
that to me, all of you.
And I wanted to say thank you to Gordon and Ward, who are both here. Gordon will have to work on your microphone so that you can jump in next time. Professor Roth, thank you. This was a trip down memory lane. We appreciate it so much. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to unmute, say goodbye. Have a great night.
Thank you.